Happy Friday, everybody. How we doing today? Welcome. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. Set yourself up for success with this weekend. Blah, if I get talk with an awesome hour. Take this hour in martial arts or in jiu-jitsu. It's known as the jiu-jitsu hour, where you get to just like purge everything, all that bad stuff out of your mind and replace it with something awesome. Before I bring my guest on today, I'm going to quote him. This is from his Instagram feed. He's quite active on Instagram. He puts out a lot of really great posts. He does a lot of video where he's actually talking, so it's much like a podcast. But today he's going to be the guest, and he put this out just last night. And he was talking about, he's worked with a lot of elite athletes. We'll hear more about him and his story as we go on. But his quote was, "The champions are the ones who persevere, who turn a negative into a positive." So martial arts, so jujitsu. And this guy's got a little history with the sport as well. With that, I would like to welcome Dr. Lyneil Mitchell. Can I call you doctor? I can't hear you. You're muted. You got to unmute.
There we go.
There we go.
Got it.
Do you go by doctor?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's one of those things, being a physical therapist too. It's like, we're not like physicians, so it's a little confusing, but at the same time, I did get my doctorate. So I embrace it more for the rest of the profession. So, you know, people that are feeling funny about calling themselves a doctor will do it. So I do it too. And
nice.
So, but I don't like encourage my patients or anybody to call me doctor. I try to keep it a little more informal, you know?
Lance said the same thing. And even, do you know Saqib Ali, Dr. Saqib?
I don't know.
So he works with Lance, and he was on, and I've asked them both the same question, and they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So awesome, man. Welcome. So you're a native of Pittsburgh, but you are in Huntington Beach, California, with all the snow and cold weather, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, that's here.
It was pretty rough waking up this morning to all the sunshine.
Yeah. Terrible.
I've been seeing all your posts. You know, I actually went to school and you know, spent a lot of time, about 10, 12 years in Erie, right on the lake. So all these you know, videos and pictures that I keep seeing are very familiar. It's nostalgic in one way, and the other way, it's like, oh man, geez, you know, they're good. Glad I don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, I was just on the corner of the lake. I went to school in Buffalo.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there you go.
Treacherous. This is nothing. this is like an average October day in Buffalo, but for New Yorkers, we're kind of like, I mean, there's just snow everywhere, man. It's just like piled. I'm like, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to put it. You know, it's really crazy, but enjoying that sunshine, I hope. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background. There's so much to unpack here. You've done so many really cool things, and there's more stuff on the horizon I really want to get to before the end of the show.
Yeah. So, you know, basically I grew up real close to Pittsburgh, super blue collar. You know, my parents are, you know, both blue collar. My mom grew up on a farm, and, you know, my dad was a city kid and an ex-military guy, you know, from the town I'm from big military presence, big VA hospital, and, you know, didn't grow up with a ton of resources. Obviously, even back then, you know, things were a lot different, especially with sports. You know, I always joke around, I never saw a speed ladder until I was like out of college. You know, we just didn't do those types of things. It was more of a go to the playground and rough and tumble. And, you know, I always, you know, tell this, like when I would go to baseball practice, you know, for my real team, I was always like, well, guys, you know, my little team thing and little league that we have going down in our sand lot was more important to me than my actual, you know, organized league. So, but we were super into sports, and, you know, Pittsburgh's a big, you know, huge sports town. So everything is sports. But one of the things that's really interesting about the situation is that, you know, my high school was the biggest high school in Western Pennsylvania for like 30 years, right? And we didn't have a wrestling program. Meanwhile, you know, Pittsburgh area is the biggest, you know, wrestling area in the country, right? Yeah. So I decided to basically, I met this guy who had went to another high school, and he basically introduced me to the sport of wrestling. Up until I was in 8th grade, I thought wrestling was all turnbuckles and, you know, Hulk Hogan and the
Yeah,
Ultimate
yeah.
Warrior and all that type of stuff, right? I
Woo!
really did not know what it was. I may have seen like Kurt Angle, because he was from Pittsburgh. I might have saw some, pictures, but it wasn't resonating with me as a sport that I would actually do, because we didn't have it at my high school until I was in 7th grade. So in 8th grade, I decided that I was going to wrestle. So I went out for the team in 9th grade. And basically I ended up being a 2-time All-American in college, right? So to go from, especially in the Pittsburgh area, 9th grade, to having never wrestled before, to being an All-American. I made the national finals and lost in 2002, my junior year, and then came back and I lost again. And I took 3rd place in my senior year, which is the reason why I say that, because it kind of set the tone for my whole life and demeanor at that point, because I was so committed, and I really didn't reach my goal, but I did. And it was really where I learned that it's more about the process than it is really about the medal or the trophy. But they don't really teach that in wrestling, right? It's like all or none. It's like the you're either the winner or you're the loser type of thing. And they do, one of the cliches that you always hear is that, this is going to help you way down the line when you have a job, all this discipline and all that type of stuff. So when I got done with undergrad and got into PT school, I was always kind of a go-getter, and pushing ahead, running some extra laps on a lot of things that I was doing, right? So in the PT profession, I started to realize that I wanted to do the same thing. So I did this really specialized training after I got done with PT school. The whole way through PT school, I was really confused, kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. There were so many cool things, from the orthopedics to the sports medicine. And then I was really interested in the neuroscience side. So I spent a couple of years doing, independent studies and things, looking into the neurological side of things. But that side of things, people just don't really get better, right? So it would be like going to jujitsu practice every day and you just don't get better. You're actually getting worse, right? And so it's a hard population to work with in terms of PT. I
feel that today.
Yes, a lot of people do feel that way, right?
I had a rough class this morning, man. I did a 7:30 class and I was the mop. I was the nail today, and everybody else was the hammer.
and you have that, and so, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and basically you hope it's not a train, but that if you keep showing up, that your skills are going to improve, hopefully, anyways. I think everybody eventually reaches a ceiling, but you can still find other things to get better with. But that population doesn't really get better. So I was struggling. I was in an inner turmoil about, which direction I was going to go. I had a clinician kind of say, give me this pearl that really, when you're looking at humans and how they function, everything is neurological, right? So basically, as I went into my sports and orthopedics, I took that with me going, okay, there's this huge neurological component that we're not talking about in sports medicine and orthopedics, because we're looking at things in this structural manner. And then basically right at that time, I got involved with this mentor, and he basically said the same thing. He was one of the best physical therapists in the country for sports medicine. And he was like, well, the difference we do here with my system is that we focus on the nervous system with sports and orthopedics. So at that time, it wasn't, a really common thing to think about that. So I ended up at the University of Cincinnati working with the Cincinnati Bengals. I was there for about 3 years. Yep. It was a big upgrade because I had went to this, really blue collar town, blue collar school, limited resources, went to a small Division II school. We barely had an athletic training department. We didn't have a strength and conditioning coach at my college, which is what I ended up doing in grad school. I had a grad assistantship while I was in grad school. Mm-hmm. So I was actually one of the assistant coaches for the wrestling team, and I was ahead of the strength and conditioning for our team. So because I had an exercise science degree. So then basically I went to the University of Cincinnati again. When I got done with that program, I started realizing about my student loans and life. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? So, the further that I looked into it, it made more sense for me to start looking and go into private practice. And I had actually had a roommate at the time when I was in Cincinnati who was getting his MBA at Xavier, and he was all about SEO, which was the funny thing. This is 2006.
Yeah. That's early.
Yeah. So he's actually a good friend of mine still, and he already exited with one of his companies called Fire Gang. It was a digital marketing company for dentists. and he was way ahead of the curve. So he kind of, pushed me in that direction. And then my brother has his MBA from Pitt, and my best friend has his MBA from Carnegie Mellon, and he's a big finance guy. So at the time, these guys were pushing me, especially because we had just gotten our doctorates. Number one, they were pushing me going, the doctorate's a stupid thing for PTs to have because it's bad branding, which I couldn't even understand at the time. Now I understand what they were talking about. It's confusing, like we were talking about at the beginning, right? And our profession is very fragmented. We have 9 board specialties. So there's orthopedics, neurological, sports, cardiovascular, electrophysiology, all of these things. So anytime that you're going to encounter a physical therapist, you're going to get all these different ideas in different paradigms because we're so specialized and niched. But our profession doesn't really do a great job of thinking about how the branding works. So right at that same time, I met another big wig in the profession who was a big private practice section guy, and he invited me to go to the private practice section conference, and that's actually where I met Lance. And so the funny, one of the main reasons I want to bring up Lance is because he was one of the first people that I met in the in the business world, networking, from physical therapy, and he had a PT / gym fitness facility, which is what I wanted to do, right? The whole idea with FyzioGym, right? That I didn't know what the name of it was back then, but basically he gave me this advice and he said, hey, don't do it. I'm like, what do you mean? This is the greatest idea ever. I'm a PT. I want to open a gym. I have all this sports background, all this stuff. He's like, don't do it. Don't open a fitness center. If you're going to do something in the fitness, space, go niche, right? Don't think about trying to compete against Planet Fitness and, 24-hour fitness and all these different places. You're never going to be able to compete against them. Stay niche. So, from there, I ended up, moving in and opening my own practice in Pittsburgh. And basically, we tried to work, a model over the years where we were combining this idea of what I call specialized fitness and physical therapy together. So in that time, I ended up, I have really bad foot and ankle problems, primarily from wrestling, which we could get more into that. Yeah. And my left foot is still messed up. I basically wrestled my last 3 or 4 years at college on one foot. It was just what I had to do. And that was a big thing for me, because when I got to PT school, I found out there was a lot of things that I could do for my foot that nobody had told me when I was in college, right? And I was also, one of those people that going to the training room kind of means you're a pussy. Am I allowed to say that on here?
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. So I had that mentality of, you were soft if you went to the training room. So it's funny that now I'm a physical therapist and, I work in sports medicine, because when I was that age, I was absolutely the exact opposite. I was all about myself. And basically I was all, about not, just being tough, right? Because that's what that sport's about. So I got really deep into working, and trying to fix my foot and ankle problem. So when I went to the University of Cincinnati, I did my research there on looking at foot and ankle problems related to female ACL injuries. So girls tear their ACLs about, anywhere from 4 to 10 times more than boys, and 80% of them are non-contact. So the guys at the University of Cincinnati were the ones that published all the award-winning research on why girls tear their ACLs and how you can prevent them. So I was adamant about that it had to do with the foot and ankle. Long story short, my research showed that it didn't have anything to do with the foot and ankle, but it was actually significant that it didn't show that it had to do anything with the foot and ankle, which was cool. So I got this real thorough learning and understanding, and also this mentorship through this process with these, guru level guys. It would be like having Marcelo Garcia or Renzo, one of those guys, taking you through and mentoring. Right. Exactly. I see that. Right through that process. Right. And that was what I learned from wrestling is you want to get next to these, high level black belt ninja savage people in your profession, right? If you can, and get that rub from them. Yeah. So then there was a program, this actually UFC fighter, MMA athlete that I had worked with in Cincinnati knew that I had this foot and ankle problem when I was training with them. And he ended up getting involved with this other trainer from this Marv Marinovich Sports Lab system. And basically they had done a lot of their workouts barefoot. So at this time, I don't know if you remember Born to Run and the 5-finger shoes and all that stuff. There was a book called Born to Run where he talks about these Mexican Indians that ran 400 miles in their bare feet and then the toe shoes. So that was what my research was on. right? So basically I had already done the research before that, those books and everything became kind of the commercialized, marketed, products that are out here now. And so I got into this program, which basically led me to the equipment and sports muscle technology and everything that I'm doing now.
So don't spill the beans on that.
Okay,
We're gonna take a break.
That's why I pulled
No,
back.
it's good. That was a great cutoff because we're gonna take a break. But I want to build up to like what you actually have going on right now, because that's the real, like what we've talked about in Lance's mastermind is like the real struggle, the real perseverance. Sure. So hang tight, everybody. We're gonna be right back. We'll see you in just a few. All right, everybody, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Today, we are zooming to Huntington Beach, California, talking to Lyneil Mitchell. He has a PhD in physical therapy. He was talking in the first portion of the show, kind of describing how it seems to me like you were saying the lack of resources is what drove you into your niche. Is that true? Would you say that's accurate? Yeah. That's pretty awesome. I was checking out your posts. I've watched a few of them this week, and especially the one you were talking about, Ronda Rousey, like walking around without an ACL.
Oh yeah,
like that's crazy. My instructor, who unfortunately lost his school here recently, but he's a Henzo black belt, and I actually just joined Henzo's because here, Henzo's is like the only school that's able to operate. In New York City right now. Like Marcelo's can't operate, a bunch of these other schools can't, but Henzo's is allowed to because of the amount of professional fighters he has in there amongst a bunch of other, throughout the genres. So I've been there for like 2 weeks. I don't know if you could see my little addition here.
Ooh, nice.
I can't wear my cans right now because it's so sensitive. I'm like,
that's a funny part. I wrestled for half my life and I don't have it.
Yeah.
You got to keep moving your head,
man. Yeah, I got in the room with. It's funny you said that the Ninja Warriors. That was the first thing they were like, here, just have that.
Yeah, exactly.
But my instructor, the story goes that he lost his ACL completely and didn't get surgery and rehabilitated himself. Like he talked to me about a lot of things that you were saying. Like I tore my MCL, not completely. But someone like grabbed my leg and took off out the door with it one day and popped my MCL and my meniscus too on the same knee a year apart. And he was like, forget about surgery. You'll be okay. And he was like, I lost my ACL and he has like full mobility. So can you talk about that for a minute? Because that just fascinates me.
Yeah. So, that's typically not the recommended thing, not to do physical therapy, right? So I always say that if you want to know whether you need physical therapy or not, you should ask a physical therapist, because nobody really understands what we do typically. So it's an interesting thing to bring up Rhonda, right? So at the time when I was, graduating high school and coming, into college and into graduate school, I don't know the whole history behind this. I know what I do know is that the Balanced Budget Act in 1997 changed our profession and basically decreased the perception that there were going to be a lot of jobs in the future for physical therapy. Yeah, so our profession made this really hard pivot to start using what's called evidence-based practice in the 90s to beef up our, validity and our legitimacy, right? So they were pumping out tons of research at the time, when I was coming through. And I always like to kind of, position this like The Last Dance, Michael Jordan, that was 1998, whenever I was my senior year of high school. Sammy Sosa and Mark McGuire were 1998. Napster came out in 1999, if you remember that. So there was a lot of stuff that was changing, right? Not only was it changing in the world, but the PT profession was changing dramatically. And one of the big topics, on a subtopic of ACL injuries was understanding what a coper was. So a coper is a term that we give somebody that's able to basically go back to sports after an ACL rupture without having surgery. Right. So the cool part about that for me was being a Pittsburgh guy. Hines Ward had played his whole career as a wide receiver without having an ACL. And so so in grappling is one thing, but being able to be an NFL wide receiver is another thing, right? So what you end up finding out is that the competitive advantage in biomechanics is to move more like Hines Ward moves, right? And basically everything that you look at biomechanically and how he moves, he's able to do that without that ligament needing to be, to do its job, because he's so mechanically efficient, and his nervous system is able to regulate the sequencing and the coordination of his movements, and also the muscle contractions, so that ACL never gets any real pressure on it, which is just fascinating really to think about, right? And again, it comes back to this whole neurological phenomenon that's going on, which when you look at it, it's like, well, it makes sense. The elite of the elite, they have a different nervous system than everybody else, right? So the cool part about Rhonda's story, to me especially, is that she was kind of average in a sense. Not really. Her mom was a world champion in judo, and basically Rhonda she was getting trained to be a swimmer when she was younger, and then she decided to switch and get into judo when she was later in elementary school, early junior high type of thing. And when she tore her ACL, which, the other interesting thing, she got cheap shotted during her practice. Some kid that she was working with, took her hard out of bounds, and it was a real cheap shot. So that, because it also comes back to women's ACL tears being non-contact, right? So when it's non-contact, that means it's a big biomechanical issue, right? It means that you're just running along, and all of a sudden you decide to change directions, and boom, something blows out. That shouldn't happen, right? So Rhonda's was a contact injury, which makes it a little bit different, because it makes you think, well, you can't assume anything, but it makes you think that that she might have not had those non-contact, biomechanics. But, long and the short of it is, her mom made her basically drill arm bars every single day until she was able to get back on her feet and start working her throws. So the next year she comes back out and she's arm barring everybody.
Wicked arm bars.
Just killing everybody. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think maybe you were saying this before you got on, or this was something I was listening to earlier, but using, a negative and turning it into a positive.
You said it.
Right?
I just quoted you.
Oh, you quoted me. Okay. Yeah. So, using, a negative situation and turning it into a positive. And the reason I've been on that is because of this COVID situation, right? It's, there's been just a tremendous amount of negativity, and I'm usually a really positive guy. Number one, in physical therapy, it's already, negative. People are coming in pain and, basically, unhappy about their situation. Their self-efficacy is down. Anytime that you get an injury, like I think about jiu-jitsu and wrestling all the time, you could feel like a world beater, and then you get hurt, and now your confidence goes from here to here, right? So then how do you build that confidence back up? And that's really what I learned that physical therapy is. We are the best at helping people improve their self-efficacy. Right. Yeah. We are the best at helping people improve their function. And so I always say this, is that if that's true and we're the best at helping people, then we need to study the science of helping people. Right. That's the thing. And being negative isn't one of those things that helps people. Right. So basically, that whole phenomena was going on, which ended up shaping my entire career and my understanding of how biomechanics work. And so then I get the privilege to end up working with Rhonda, and she has this situation, and it was like, this is amazing. This is like, the epitome of moment of my career, or whatever you want to say, it was really cool. Yeah.
So it's a lot of those things are very interesting to me, because that was like the motto in the dojo that I trained at. I mean, when my MCL was tore, my instructor said it. He was the same way, just like biomechanically adjusted things. And when you watch him move, you're like, my God, you're like a cheetah, and then when he's like, I don't have an ACL, you're just like, what? Like, how is that possible? And neurologically, the dude was like on another level.
Right.
And a lot of these things are very martial arts. He would say, the mind has a negative bias. You have to be your own best cheerleader. You really have to, it's up to you and to surround yourself with the people. So a lot of these things are like super hardcore fundamental martial arts values. And it's great to see people in physical therapy doing it, because you're right. Like when people come in, they're just like, they're battered, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. And he told me, when I tore my MCL, he was like, make it your ally. Like, sure, you're not going to be able to do, it was the same way, I wasn't going to be able to do like some of my signature things. And I remember one of those first days back, I took a week off, or like 5 days, where I just like iced it, like really made sure, like it was unstable, but then I got back in there, like slowly. I was just like, let's see what can happen. And I started like getting on people's backs so quickly. And they were like, I thought you were injured, and you just see something different, man. As long as you don't give up, like you said, turn the negative into a positive. And sorry, I'm clicking too many buttons. Turn the negative into a positive, and relating that to COVID is really great. We're going to take another break here, and I want to pick up with that hardcore. I want you to talk about FyzioGym and like how you did that with your business, because you have an existing business and then you got another one that you're popping off. And how did you really utilize this lesson that you learned, like helping other people, to turn in on yourself and help your business grow? So stew that in your mind for a minute.
Sure.
We're gonna be back in just a moment, and we'll pick right back up with that, everybody. So hang tight. All right, everybody, welcome back again. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. Today, we're talking to Lyneil Mitchell out of Huntington Beach, California. He's got a gym called FyzioGym Revolution. He's also got a new product or series of products coming to market, but we want to pick up where we were just at, which is the bread and butter, the guts of this show, which is how do you persevere when the shit gets tough? Because it gets tough when you set out on your own, when you open your own business, going against the better advice of people like Lance Knob and doing your own thing. You're in the gray matter. You have to be able to do what Lyneil was talking about in the last segment, is whether it's your physical health, your neurological health, turn that negative into a positive. How has this serviced you, offering this for other people to turn in on your own self and survive this? Because gyms got beat, potentially even worse than restaurants. I mean, all the restaurant people are crying, but like gyms, Broadways, music venues, like they got it, I think, even worse. So
it's rough right now.
Yeah. So talk to the people, tell them, give them some nuggets, because you put a lot of good stuff out on social. Let's hear what you like, kind of your process and what you did to get through.
Yeah, so it's kind of the cliche story, and I think back, and it's funny to be saying this now, but I wasn't somebody that responded well to my injuries. I wasn't somebody that responded well to negativity in general. I was kind of a lot more emotional than I am now. But wrestling is that sport that literally, I said this to somebody a couple weeks ago, you are broken mentally every practice, right? It's like you go into that practice feeling, you're always apprehensive because you're getting ready to get into a fist fight with somebody, basically, with rules, right? So you're getting ready for that. You got to be preparing for that. Plus, you're preparing to compete against some other guy that has been preparing his whole life as well to face somebody like you, and waiting for that pivotal moment where they can self-express, right? So you're constantly getting broken down. So you get used to that process. But when you get injured, like I was saying, and like what you were saying, was one of the problems with wrestling and grappling. That I remember the first time I was at a jiu-jitsu class, and somebody had their arms stuffed in their gi, and they were still practicing or whatever. And I was like, what? You shouldn't be doing that. And at this time I was a PT already. So we get away with working around injuries, which comes back to, one of the things Rhonda used to say all the time. That was one of her words she would use all the time. Well, you just got to find a workaround, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times that's what happens, is that people end up working around the injury or the pain point or whatever it is, and they never face it head on, right? And what I've seen over the years of working with people with injuries, especially the elite level athletes, and I tell my younger athletes this, like, if you want to become a higher level athlete or a professional athlete, especially, eventually you have to learn how to deal with injuries on another level. They become a professional at dealing with injuries. Number one, no offense, Jeremiah, they consult with somebody like me instead of trying to do it on their own, because you end up with these residual things. Even you're the master guy that you're talking about, he probably has deficits that he doesn't know about that are going to come to affect him later, right? And so if you want to, another one of our jobs as a physical therapist should be a re-injury specialist, right? So I'm going to do the best that I can to not get you re-injured, right? So that's a part of it. It's not just about getting you cleared and back out. So one of the things that people have a really hard time with is continuing to do positive things, right? And continue to basically put those inputs in a positive way, because they get into this negative mindset about the things that they can't do. Right. And I talked about, it's not just with injuries, it's across the lifespan. Eventually you have to modify your activity, right? Eventually, you're going to be 70 years old and you can't say, oh, well, you know what, I guess I'm just going to sit on the couch and do nothing, right? So whether you have an injury or whether you get a little deconditioned or whatever the problem is in your life, you can't start going, okay, hey, number one, I'm going to stop doing the basics. Right. And number two, these are my top three things. There's five things, right? Number one, you can't stop doing the basics. You have to stay consistent with doing the small stuff, and you may have to find new things to do that are going to create the building blocks. Number two, don't make it worse. Right. And that was a big thing for me, right? I have a tendency I'm aggressive, right? I was a wrestler. So whenever I'm faced with adversity, I sometimes get more aggressive and I could actually make it worse. And it wasn't really until I got married that I started really paying attention to that, because I would think that it was always my wife's issue. And I'm realizing, over the years that it was me actually making it worse. And even with employees and those types of things as well, you get frustrated, you maybe try to do some type of strategy and then you end up making it worse. So that's my rule number two, is do not make it worse, right? And then rule number three is to run the extra laps, right? So once you get the basics down and you're not making it worse, you have to run the extra laps and do some type of bonus work to keep you moving forward. So when the smoke clears, and this is what happens all the time, right? People that are behind, they're not doing the basics, they're doing things that are making it worse, they're not running the extra laps. They get to a point where they're like, okay, now I want to do this. The smoke is cleared. It's time for me to do this. And they're not ready. Yeah. Right. Because they haven't been preparing. Right. And it's the same thing in life. And it's the same thing in business. Right. Is that, when you get into these adversity type of situations and things are heightened, you don't have the time to start going, okay, you know what? I'm going to start reading all these training manuals now. And I'm going to get coaching and all this stuff. You're really now left, just like you would be in competition, to rely on your training that you've been going through. So if you haven't been doing that training, right, and this is the challenge for most people, they have a hard time being self-driven with their own training, right? That's where you're really reaching that mastery level. If you can do it on your own, it's great, but most of us need mentorship, and most of us need coaching, and most of us need consulting and therapists to help us, walk down the correct path and lead us down the correct path. Because especially when you're hurt and you're injured, if you take one wrong step, it could be a catastrophe. Right. So at the same time, there's no excuses. I love the Jocko Willink, scenario that all excuses are lies. Right. Yeah. So you have to take ownership of your situation and find the ways to make the best of it. And that's on you. And you have to do that. Or, basically you're going to make it, a more painful process as you go, which is okay. Sometimes, that's the necessity. That's
how we learn, right?
Yeah, you have to embrace that painful scenario and get through it, which again, coming back to wrestling, which, with my wife, we talk about this all the time. She's the opposite of me. She doesn't find that same enjoyment with doing the right thing, even though it's painful. Right. And so she would rather do the right thing in a comfortable situation, where I've kind of learned to be the opposite, where I like putting myself in an uncomfortable situation because it brings the best out of me. Right. But it also gives you a tendency to be in a situation where, basically if you make one, false step, especially if you're already injured, you can really fall that much harder, injure yourself, So, when it comes down to the gym situation and COVID, it's the same thing, right? Trying to make the best of it. And, even with athletes, right, we look at metrics all the time and go, I had a Olympic level wrestler that I worked with 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. It was before the last Olympics. And so he had, was having a back problem, and in his mind, he was telling me that he had to be able to deadlift over 500 pounds to be able to be a good wrestler. And it was like, I understood what he was saying, but he was so stuck on that metric, right? That metric was telling him who he was instead of having a better idea of who he really was, right? Yeah. So when it comes down to this self-efficacy idea, right, we have to be constantly reinforcing that. And sometimes we get too stuck on the metrics, and you're using those metrics and you don't have this balance. It's kind of like the Bruce Lee thing. You be like water, right? Water can either crash or it can flow, but you need to be both entities, right? So you need to be able to do the subjective things, and you also need to be able to do the objective things as well. And you can't let those objective measures always dictate, everything that you're doing. And as a leader in a business, you start to realize after you've been doing that for a while, you get your metric snapshots every month, and you can't be responding every time that you see good or bad, right?
You're not
good
supposed to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And again, I think that's what most people do. Right. And then they get stuck on these metrics. I call it philometric. I make up all kinds of words. So what
was the word for the big toe again?
Hallux.
Hallux.
Yeah, the big toe. Well, yeah, and that's that's my major issue. Which the cool part for me along those lines, because of my foot injury, and I never had surgery with it, I've been forced to do my therapy. Since I was in college, I have to run these extra laps. I have to do all of this stuff, and if I would have had surgery on my foot, it would have never have really helped me. So I've been in this process for my whole life, which also helps me to come back to my clients and the people that I work with and be like, no, this is what it takes.
This is for real.
Yeah, right. Exactly. If you want to get through this process, like I said, you're going to have to modify what you're doing, to be able to get through it. And hey, at some point you might have to accept that you can't do the things that you used to do. Right. And that you have to pivot and modify, and shift to doing something else. But no matter what, you got to find something to do that you can put your efforts into that's going to allow you to give your best effort. Right. It's the whole John Wooden thing, having the peace of mind, knowing that you basically gave your best efforts at achieving something. Right. So I think that's what it comes down to, even with these business situations, right? Everybody's, focused on the outcome all the time, and they're not always focused on their process. And, if you're executing on your process on a daily basis and doing the best that you can with that, that's all that you can do.
Yep.
Right. And all you can do is the next day is wake up and repeat that process again.
And not panic when you see those reports.
Yeah. Right. And that's what ends up happening. You end up not panicking because you know that you're already doing your best. Right. But you do have to pay attention to the scoreboard. You right. So and a lot of people on the other end, they float through not paying attention to metrics. Right.
I've been that guy too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really easy to do, and the other side of it is the metrics help to make the situation more enjoyable. They help you create those carrots to dangle in front of yourself. So you're chasing the carrot, not needing to beat yourself with a stick. Right. There's that one book called Carrot and Sticks, but that was a thing that my college wrestling coach said all the time. You need to find a carrot to dangle for yourself to chase. But I've also been having this new idea, right? And so people don't like being uncomfortable. And I think that it's funny because I know, at least for myself, that when I'm agitated, I'm usually close to my best. Right. It puts you kind of almost into that fight or flight flow scenario. Right. So even walking into a jujitsu or a wrestling practice, I'm usually a pretty happy-go-lucky type of person. I'm in a really good mood most of the time. And I would always say this, it was a complete like Jekyll and Hyde moment. As soon as you get your head snapped, right, it's like, you're immediately into that. So that's agitating, right? So the next thing you know, you're in this really heightened state. But another thing that I've seen from working with these high level athletes and just high performers in general, I was telling somebody this yesterday, like my circle is, as I get older, just keeps getting better and better. I have all of these high level business people that I know, and you guys and all this stuff, and it's been really cool. But that ability to self agitate, right, is really the key. Right. That ability. You don't need to always get agitated from external locus of control. Right.
Well, you have to practice. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But most people, they avoid that. Right. Because they don't want to feel that little bit of negative. Right. That little uncomfortable thing. Right. But on the other side of that is where the growth and the positivity and the performance comes from a lot of the times.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree with you more. We're going to take one more break, and then I want to come back and wrap up.
These breaks are kind of nice because they let you get into your head.
Yeah,
about what you're talking about.
I did one on thing. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't even get into what we were supposed to talk about there. So
no, you did great. We're gonna do you answered my question thoroughly, and then we're gonna talk about what you got coming up. But you're right. I did a show the day after Thanksgiving, just on my own with no commercials, no breaks, and I was lost. It's nice to just it's like that 90 seconds between rounds. Get some water.
Right. Exactly.
All right, so we're gonna take 90 seconds Pick a new training partner. We'll be back in just a few, everybody.
There you go.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Last round, let's make it our best. Ding, ding, ding. We're talking to Lyneil Mitchell. He's got a gym in Huntington Beach, California called FyzioGym Revolution, but he's also got a series of physical therapy apparatus that he is releasing, and it's been a bit of a process and another opportunity to be uncomfortable to turn all those great lessons you share with your clients in on yourself. So tell everybody about the wobbler and just kind of like the bumps. We've got about 10 more minutes. I want you to like kind of talk about the bumps and what like somebody can expect trying to bring something like this. It's going to be tangible, physical, technological, neurological, all these things, putting it together and getting it ready, and how all the little sidetracks and things that happen.
Sure. So, and I'll give you a little background real quick. So one of the reasons why I really got into this system was because when I opened my physical therapy practice in Pittsburgh, there's a huge hospital system there called University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. They have their own HMO insurance plan. They own about 40% of the market share with the insurance premiums or insurance plans. And they don't let any of the small guys into their network, right? So basically you're missing, 40% of the market. You can't even get 40% of the market. It would be like going to a different country and not being able to use the right currency or whatever, right? Literally, it doesn't work. So we wanted to have this unique selling proposition, the great part is I was super into it. Early on, I actually wanted to work more on the wellness side in terms of like chronic disease, because it's such a big deal. But I'm an athlete, and the sports thing just kept coming to the surface, right? And so that was a big part of me getting involved with this, the Marinovich system, which direct access means that you can go to a physical therapist without a referral from a physician. So at the time, the national average was less than like 3% for all physical therapy in the United States for somebody to go to a physical therapist and a self-referral without a referral from a physician. So it was a real big new law that had changed. And in Pennsylvania in 2004, they had passed it all. I graduated in 2006, opened my practice in 2010. And because of the situation in Pittsburgh, and also when we were in Erie, we were working for a couple of other guys, and our situation there, it made more sense for us to go direct to the consumer, right? Where most physical therapy businesses are designed to, basically go to the insurance company, get in network with the right, situation with the insurance company, or to create relationships with physicians, right? So it basically, when you also enter into a new market, you're battling these all good old boy networks of these, physicians and physical therapists that already have these relationships, and they like easy, right? They like to be able to just, hey, I'm going to send this to my buddy, whether or not everything's going well, they just keep doing that. And then also there's this idea of a physician owned practice, right? Where the physician actually owns the physical therapy, which is actually illegal in certain states. Yeah. So certain states, you're able to do that. So I wanted to keep differentiating us. I ended up getting involved with the inventor, who, one of the side stories on this, he was actually the roommate of Bruce Jenner in college, which was pretty interesting situation. He was a really high level decathlete. He was 6'6" and basically ended up getting injured. He won the national championship in the decathlon and in a non-Olympic year. So then he ended up getting injured. Bruce came behind him, broke all of Mike Maddox's records. And then Mike went on to work for a company called Mini Gym, which was an isokinetic company back in the 60s and 70s. They still exist today. And another guy was also, an entrepreneurial guy, was a teammate of his, had also went to work for this same company. They split off and went and did their own things. Eventually, Mike got involved with this sports lab, Marv Marinovich situation, and started creating new pieces of equipment for them. And he was just a big go-getter. You know the heavy rope, jump rope? Mike Maddox invented that. Nice. The torso tiger, which was the ab wheel that had the little spring in it that helped you come back, he invented that. And so he also invented this product that I have now called the wobbler. So Mike was really big into isokinetics and trying to do a lot of volume and repetition, because that's what trains your muscle memory and your neuromuscular system, right? So let's figure out a way to create the least amount of damage to the body and give you the most amount of training volume possible, so you can keep coming back every day with good recovery, right? It's like shooting a basketball when we think about the neuromuscular and the functional training and functional conditioning side, right? We need to do a lot of practice. So if you're practicing when you're absolutely sore and destroyed all of the time, you end up practicing like a person that's destroyed and sore all the time, which made sense to me as a wrestler. It was like, oh yeah, why do we do that? Maybe there is a better way. And we also don't do that in physical therapy either, because we're going to create more inflammation and more pain, and it's going to set us back. So the wobbler is this, basically most balancing products are reactive balancing tools, right? So where you stand on them and you're like shaking and trying to hold your body in position, right? Which on one end is okay because you need to get that basic balance. But when we see the injuries and we see falls in the elderly, it's always dynamic. It's happening. It's when you're moving. It's when I your grandma says, I got up to try to go to the refrigerator and I misstepped and I fell, or the same thing with the athlete. You're running along. It's dynamic when the ACL blows out. It's not standing still. So the wobbler is the only a piece of exercise equipment, and that's what the patent is on, that you're able to do balance exercises and actually move around in space, which it's kind of a lot more like dancing, especially if you throw on your favorite song, which is what I do, especially first thing in the morning. I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Robbins. He does the rebounder. He usually gets on the trampoline first thing in the morning, and that's kind of the same idea. Yeah, what the wobbler does, and it helps your lymphatic and your vascular system get your blood flowing. You get all that blood out of your legs, and so it's a real positive thing. So basically the patent has 8 or I think 9 years left on it right now. We bought the patent from him, and before this though, what it would be 3 or 4 years ago, I basically had two kind of experience that were the aha moment. I was working one day. Shamarko Thomas from the Pittsburgh Steelers was coming in for his session. I was real busy. I said, hey, Shamarko, hop over on the wobbler. I'll be back in a minute. I came back in like 10 minutes later, and he was pouring sweat. Right. And I was like, oh my gosh, I checked his heart rate. He was at like 140. And I'm like, oh man, this is more than a balancing tool, right? We can use this for conditioning. So it really switched my mind into, okay, this is a pretty cool product here. Then like within the same like time frame, a couple weeks, at the most, I'd go home, and my mother at the time had been watching my son on a daily basis while we were at work. And I come home, my son's down for a nap, and my mom's watching her soap opera, and she's doing her wobbler. And I'm like, what are you doing, Mom? She's like, I love this thing. It works my core and my hips. And how long have you been doing? Oh, I've been doing this for months. And she never even said anything to me about it. And then the light bulb went on, and I was like, oh, this could be a product for the home. This could be a product for athletes to use everywhere. But in the which I didn't say this, when I first encountered Mike, he presented me with 10 different pieces of equipment. So I ended up buying all 10 pieces of equipment. So, and some of the pieces of equipment were more for strength, right? And so, and Mike was kind of biased at the time towards these couple of other pieces of equipment for jumping that he wanted to put out, because he's a big athlete guy, right? And that was the problem with the system. So right when I entered into the system, the whole thing was crumbling. Right. So and you could like smell it, right? You knew something was wrong and something was off.
About 3 minutes. Okay.
Okay. So as I entered in, the system was completely, falling apart. I got lucky. I ended up meeting Troy Polamalu in Pittsburgh and did some work with him. And he kind of shed the light on what was going on as this system was crumbling. So we got the product made in steel originally. So the steel was basically 25 to 30 pounds. It was really heavy. It was harder for most people to move, even though, they could still do it. So we decided this time to get it made in plastic. Right. And it was a huge undertaking. So the last few years, I really decided like, look, I'm going to leave this equipment alone unless I can really find the right situation. I didn't want to end up being like the rest of the people that have come through this system and kind of not been able to, take it to fruition because all of the things weren't right. That was probably the biggest thing that I learned, with trying to manufacture a piece of equipment. You can't do it on a physical therapist budget. Right. So, but I'm a go-getter. So I said, hey, let's go and try to figure this out. And we had a demand for it. We had sold 300 of them at my clinic in Pittsburgh because people just loved it. And they just kept saying, hey, where can I get one of these? So we kept making it. But then when we wanted to try to take it to the next level, we went to Dick's Sporting Goods and talked to a few people there. And they were like, yeah, this would never work because it's too heavy and all this other stuff. So it ended up getting tabled. And then when I when I had come out here to try to meet Ronda Rousey the first time, I ended up leaving her and her roommate a wobbler. So when I ended up working with her, she was like, oh, I love the wobbler, blah, blah, blah. So she started stirring up us getting the wobbler back into the creative process and getting it manufactured. And then basically right as her and I were working through our business plan, COVID hit. And it blew everything up. And she just said, oh, you know what? I'm going to back off on this. I don't know what's going to happen. The gym market, the fitness market is down.
Yeah.
So I ended up partnering with another guy named Taylor Potts. And, we've invested in, buying the patent and getting the plastic wobbler out, and it's ready right now. So it's we finally got it going. Yeah. And it's working. It's great. And we tried to actually add some bands to it, so you could do some upper body stuff. Yeah. So one of the things that the wobbler does is you have limping on one end of the spectrum and you have elite sprinting on the other end of the spectrum. So when you limp, you favor one side of your body basically, right? And when you're an elite athlete, another made up word that I came up with is called ambikinetic, meaning like ambidextrous, and that you can control your body using all four limbs. Well, that's the difference between somebody that's injured and somebody that's average versus somebody that's elite. And not all elite athletes do it perfectly, but most of them are on that high end of the spectrum where they're creating force with all four limbs in their trunk, and they're also coordinated with all four limbs. So when you're rehabbing somebody that has a one side dominant limping type of pattern, you're trying to resurrect them and get them back into that more ambikinetic, all four limbs using their whole body for the movement. You're literally trying to teach them how to be more athletic, right? So that's the whole progression of functional training. So the wobbler is designed to do that. There's this phenomenon called the spinal engine, right? That basically has to do with how your spine is moving your body. And the wobbler is the only product out there that basically mimics and replicates that movement.
Awesome. And those are great lessons for business too. Like that progression, like the wobbler is like, I can see like the neurological component for plugging that in. Like you have the physical practice and then transfer that to your brain. Real quick before we hop off the air, if anybody has questions, where can they reach you?
We were talking about this. I'd say just DM me at Dr. Lyneil on Instagram or Lyneil Mitchell on Facebook. If you guys are interested in checking more out from the wobbler, we can send you a link. We're basically piloting a first run here with Rhonda and a bunch of the kind of influencers that I know and getting their feedback. And we'll have them ready for everybody here in the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested, let me know. And we also do a lot of different things. I'm working on online training with people now. And like I said before, if you're thinking about you have an injury or you're trying to improve your performance, have, just like most professional athletes, right? They have a physical therapist in their stable, just like Rhonda, right? So they can communicate with us to find out what the best strategies are. Use us, we're here, right? And I think especially right now, our professions are all hurting, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not me, check out your local trainers and physical therapists, for the things they can help you with.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Really great stuff. I'll talk to you in a couple weeks for the next mastermind. The rest of you, I'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Peace out.